we are embarking upon the next essay. I know you just finished one, but I really hope that the summary response will have prepared you for the critique essay, which is actually going to use some of the skills that you've already been practicing. And the movie review or book review or whatever you chose to focus on in last week's discussion board post also is good practice for the critique essay. Now, just to review from last week, what is a critique? A critique is a systematic evaluation of a work, right? So we critique things all of the time. We have opinions. We judge things positively, negatively, and middle of the road. But to do so systematically, to do so fairly, means that you use what we call criteria, right? Clearly related to the word critique, so obviously essential. So to judge something, to evaluate something, you need to develop characteristics or traits that you value in this particular thing you're critiquing. And then with that in mind, you have kind of a checklist and you go through and you say, how does my subject do in these categories? So when you reviewed a movie, you might have looked at the quality of the plot. And then you would examine the film's plot and decide, okay, how good is it? And what makes a good plot anyway? And so you had to, first study your subject, but then you're analyzing it. You're thinking about it more deeply, more critically. And that is what we're going to do in your critique paper, except what we will be critiquing is a source, or rather two sources that you will read and write about in this paper. Now, on the next page of the module, you're going to read over the instructions for the critique essay in detail, but I do want to preview it here quickly as we just go over a few highlights before you really dive into the module for this week. So for this assignment, you are choosing a topic that should be related in some way to the theme of technology, but that is pretty wide open. It gives you a lot of freedom. And you are going to find two sources that have something to do with the topic you've chosen. One of them will have to be a scholarly source. And in this module, you'll learn about what that means and how to find one. And then the second source, you have more choices, which you'll learn more about in the actual assignment instructions for the critique and throughout the module. Now, I would suggest choosing a topic for this paper that you are really interested in, because life will be a lot easier if for your final paper that comes after this, you continue with the same topic, because the work you'll do for the critique would really help you write the annotated bibliography and argumentative research paper. So you're welcome to change your mind later, but it would be a good idea for this paper to focus on a topic that you believe you are interested enough in to want to write another paper about. Because the critique is sort of like dipping your feet into the water and, testing the research waters to see what's out there on your topic, but you're not really making an argument in this essay. What you're doing is you're practicing your research skills. You are conducting quality research, finding credible sources, and then studying them closely and thinking about their value, right? You're investigating and then reflecting on the sources that you find. And hopefully by the end of the paper, you will feel more informed about the topic and you'll be developing your opinions on it that could very well lead to a final paper that makes an argument of your own. So in the critique essay, you'll do basically these three things. First, you'll introduce your topic and just talk about your research process. In this module, I will be talking about the research process, modeling it for you and giving you tips and strategies. And in your paper, you will just take a paragraph to discuss how did you find your sources? What was your thought process? So this is very much a paper that is reflective and exploratory. Then in the body of the paper, you'll take one source, very briefly summarize it, even more briefly than in your summary response essay, And then most importantly, you will critique the source. And we're going to learn throughout this module, how would you critique it? What would you do exactly in order to critique a source? But you've already been thinking about that in the discussion board post at the beginning of this module, when I asked you to consider, what do you think makes good writing? Well, some of those things you thought up, or even some of the ideas that your classmates came up with, that might actually be something you can use in your critique essay. And then finally, the conclusion of the paper is what we call a synthesis. When you look at more than one source, in this case we've got two sources, and you say, how do they connect to each other? What do I understand better or believe now that I've looked at them side by side? So basically, if the topic is, stem cell research or what have you, and I read a pro article and a con article, I will have a more informed opinion because I read both of those together rather than reading two cons and two pros. So the process of synthesis is when you say, okay, what did I find out from my research? It's always good to look at more than one source. That is key to good research and good writing. And so at the end, you start to put the pieces together, and that would be something that kind of precedes a final paper where you do make an argument of your own. So the critique essay is not really an argument so much as, again, as I like to think of it, an exploration where you get curious, you practice good research skills, you report on your findings, you critique your findings, and then you theorize, what could I do in a larger paper with these two sources I found? What do I think about them? That's the critique in a nutshell. So when you were thinking about what qualities make up good writing, you came up with, I'm sure, some really great stuff. Now, there's a lot of different ways we can evaluate writing. Every time you turn in a paper, I critique your writing. I evaluate it for a grade, and also in order to help you improve, and also to tell you what you're doing well. And I'll be doing that as I grade your summary responses this week. Now, I just pulled this up here as an example. It's from Hunter College's Reading and Writing Center, and they've developed what they say are 5 qualities of good writing. These are not universal. You do by no means have to focus on these in your paper, but I wanted to show you an example of criteria for writing. So if someone was looking at an essay, which a writing center obviously has in mind, they're usually helping students write better essays. They've decided that 5 things, 5 criteria that we can judge writing by is the focus, a single clear idea that a paper focuses on. The development, does each paragraph actually explore that main focus in more detail? Does it make sense, right? Does it flow well? Unity, does every paragraph connect to the one before it? Does the paper build idea upon idea to reach some kind of conclusion? Coherence, again, how does the paper flow? Are there transitions in the paper that help us to connect ideas? Does it seem like the information logically follows, the information that came before? And then correctness, your grammar, your spelling, your punctuation, and all of that good stuff. So those are 5 categories that you do get graded on quite often in your writing, and you could easily read something and hold that piece of writing to the same standards. And you could talk about whether it's focused, whether it's well developed, whether it's coherent, right? Those could be useful pieces of criteria for someone to judge a piece of writing. Now, for our purposes, I think we can get a little deeper than that, because we're not just thinking about, is this source well written, as though it were a college paper. We are conducting research and finding sources with the goal of learning more about a topic. And so we want to critique the source from the sense of, what does it have to offer? What does it do well? Maybe where does it falter? How valuable or useful is this source to me as I hope to understand a topic better? So some more sample criteria that you could use for your paper, but you don't have to, throughout the module, we'll be thinking about different ideas for criteria that you can use to judge a source. But one of them would be, is this article or book written by someone with expertise? And is it published in a reputable journal or website, right? We want to know who's behind the piece of writing. Can we trust them? Do they know what they're talking about? Does the source provide quality evidence to back up its points? Or does the writer share their opinions and not explain them, or, help us to believe them with any kind of evidence? Along with evidence, citing sources, right? These are all things that you've learned about when it comes to your own writing. And so we want to hold other writers to those standards too. So if it's a good source, it not only backs up its claims with evidence, but that evidence should probably come from reliable sources that are cited or linked to in an article, right? That we can find the trail of influences and sources that have helped this writer produce their article, their argument. If we're looking to this source to help us understand something better, we want it to inform us in appropriate detail, right? Does it only give us a broad overview? Then we feel that we don't really understand anything new. It's all stuff we've heard before. Does it go into too much detail and you end up losing, the train of thought of the writer? That kind of feeds into the next criterion, which could be, is it understandable to its audience? If this is being published in a newspaper, but it's written like it belongs in an academic journal, that's actually not good, right? Whoever your audience is, you want to write in a way that they can understand you. So just being able to read and understand a source, that sounds simple enough, but that's not just your responsibility. It's also on the writer to do a good job in explaining things to you. And then finally, one that you might consider is, how is the source relevant? Relevant to the topic, to the present moment, to our society, to a project that you will plan on writing. That's a broad category, but a very useful one. So here are 6 criteria. You could choose 2 or 3 of them to talk about in your paper, or you might go in a different direction. We'll go over options throughout this module, and you can decide what matters to you when it comes to choosing a good source for a research paper. So when you are critiquing your source, these are some general questions that you'll want to ask yourself. So throughout this module, we'll be looking at research methods so that I can help you find sources. Then once you read them and you decide whether or not you want to use them for this paper, you'll want to consider the following. So first and foremost, what's your topic? You're going to have to pick that pretty early on this week. So what are you curious about? What do you want to learn more about? That has to be the starting point. Then as you start looking at sources and you decide upon 2 of them, you would ask yourself, of course, what is it about? But then also importantly, what are its strengths and weaknesses? You are judging the source. Consider, how is it useful to you? What do you get out of it? And then in your actual paper, you will set up 2 to 3 criteria in which you will systematically critique the source. So you would say, okay, what's important about this source? I'm going to explain to my reader how I have judged it according to these criteria. Now you might use the same criteria for both of your sources, or if they're very different from each other, you might need to judge them in different ways. For this paper, one of your sources has to be a scholarly article. You could then choose another one, choose a magazine article, a documentary. You can even choose a creative source like an episode of a TV show if it somehow connects to your topic and the other article. In that case, we would probably need to use different criteria. You would not judge the scholarly article in quite the same way as you would the TV episode. That's something we'll talk about later too. But you want to see that you have options and that this is very much a curious, investigative process that we're pursuing with this paper. So in the critique paragraphs, and we'll talk about this in more detail later in the module, you've got a pretty straightforward setup. Briefly describe the source, a 1 to 2 sentence summary instead of a whole paragraph like in your previous paper. For nonfiction, for articles, basically what's the main argument or the main idea. For a creative source, you would sum up the plot or the theme, and then your 2 to 3 criteria. That would be 1 paragraph for source 1, 1 paragraph for source 2, and there you go. Sounds simple, right? I promise it is. This is an involved process, the critique, but if you follow the steps, I think it's also a straightforward process too. So that brings us to the important first step. What are you going to research about? Choose something that is connected to technology. That's very broad. It could be digital technology. It could be something else. Maybe it's the same topic of the article you wrote about for your summary response. You wrote about telemedicine, or you wrote about video games. You can't use that same article, but you could continue with the topic if it interests you. Or you can also explore the Opposing Viewpoints website. I'm going to tell you more about that in the next module page. There's a video that'll go through how you use it, but I will give you a quick glance here to see how this source might be useful to you if you're trying to think of a topic. In order to access the Opposing Viewpoints website, you want to go to our library webpage, and then when you get here, you're going to click Databases, which is actually something we will come back to for other resources later in the module. And you'll look over here to the side, Recommended Databases, scroll down and click. And I've also on the next page of this module, I've included a direct link to this page, so you can also check it out that way. But now that we're here, let's take a look at what this website has to offer us. So Opposing Viewpoints is a website put together by Gale and Context. Gale is a company that publishes and collates tons of research. And what this website does is ideal for college students. It covers a number of issues, topics, especially ones that people tend to disagree upon, perhaps. And therefore, it's perfect as a starting point for thinking about a topic for a paper, even for finding sources for a paper, as I'll show you in a moment. So we can see that they're highlighting a particular issue, and we can say, oh, I'm curious, what kind of issues are of interest right now? But we're actually going to go down here to browse issues, and you're going to see that there's a number of categories: business and economics, national debate topics, science, technology, and ethics. So you could start with any one of these and see what kinds of topics, are perhaps often debated and of interest to people. So we're going to actually go with science, technology, and ethics because that's clearly going to address technology in some way. But I think you'll find that a lot of these categories will intersect. So if I click on society and culture, there's probably going to be something about social media. If I click on health and medicine, that's going to have some kind of technology component as well. So feel free, if you're looking for a topic for the paper, to explore around. But I'm going to start here, science, technology, and ethics. And now that's a broad category that's broken down into even more categories. So when you look at this, you could ask yourself, are any of these topics something I'm interested in, something I'm affected by, something I am curious to learn more about? And you can see that I've already clicked on a few here: artificial intelligence, automation in the workplace, big data, digital media, Facebook, facial recognition technology. There's all kinds of stuff here. So poke around, browse, see what looks interesting. But for the purpose of this week, I'm going to use video games as a topic that I will bring up in multiple videos so that you can see me performing research as an example and developing a critique topic. So let's look at video games. And maybe, I'm a video game player. I'm wondering if I could somehow write my paper about games, but I don't know my exact area of interest yet because this isn't a book report. We're not going to talk about what is a video game exactly. It's well established at this point, even though, just in case you didn't know, they actually define video games for you right here. But the site goes into much more depth than that, and it offers you a number of different resources. So Featured Viewpoints breaks down some key articles from different places that debate common, issues when it comes to video games. Does it harm young people? Is it violent or not? And then an interesting pro topic, how video games help people cope with disabilities. So I could click on Featured Viewpoints and see that, these are popular subtopics when it comes to video games that I might be interested in learning more about. So you can see there's a lot of stuff here. Controversial apps for kids make cosmetic surgery into a game. Interesting. And you can see that, these are all pretty recent. Maybe in the source is recent, so that we're talking about something contemporary, something vital. But I can also look at a lot of other stuff here too. So academic journals, 145 academic journal articles that this website has chosen. And there are way more than that about video games, but they've just decided here are some that we think are interesting or useful in some way. There is audio, video, newspapers, magazines, all kinds of stuff here. So you can find your sources for your paper at Opposing Viewpoints, probably. I would say don't stop at this page as your one-stop shop for finding sources. I do want you to go through the other videos that I'm going to include in this module that show you how to use other library databases, how to use Google Scholar, how to use ebooks that are available through the library. But you might get lucky and find two sources here, a scholarly one and a popular one that you could use in your paper. But I'm looking through here, and maybe in the back of my head, I have been developing a topic, and it actually isn't covered here. So something I'm interested in is somebody who plays video games that are heavy on story, right? And your character has to make tough decisions. I'm curious if video games influence our ethical decision making. If we learn lessons or practice certain, brain exercises, if we develop empathy, what do we get out of video games when our characters that we play have to make decisions? And maybe there's a paper there, right? Or at least it's a question that I might be able to find more about in my research. So if I type in video game ethics, let's see what we got. All right, so there's not a ton on this topic on Opposing Viewpoints. If I look elsewhere, I will find more information. So Opposing Viewpoints is a great start, and it might be a great resource for your topic, but it doesn't cover everything. So you might find yourself moving on and using some other resources. But I can see here that there are several news articles, Gamergate, Twitter CEO. This is not actually the kind of stuff I'm talking about when I say ethics. Here, Gamergate again, more, right? So that's clearly a topic that people are curious about, but it's not my topic. So I would end up turning to another method, the library of databases, which I'm going to show you in another video. What kinds of search terms I can use to find sources that do meet my interest about how video games explore ethics. But for now, Opposing Viewpoints is a good website for a lot of people to start, and you might end up lucking out and finding that the topic you are interested in is covered in a lot of detail. So if I go to technology and education, I'm just working with an example here, and I see what kind of stuff they feature. Active learning and technology approaches for teaching immunology to undergraduate students. So this is an academic journal article. One of your sources must be an academic journal article, and we'll talk about that later in the module. But I can also find other kinds of sources, and that could work for my second source. So I could use something, a video of some sort. I could use a magazine article. It's not scholarly, but I might decide is still credible and useful. But just to find a topic if you're stuck, you might consider browsing through opposing viewpoints. Now, by no means do you need to find your topic here. It's just an option. If you have one in mind, go with it. If you're uncertain if it's a topic that will work well for this paper, please feel free to email me and ask. But remember that the critique is not an argument. You don't have to have an idea for, an argument you want to make about your topic. That's the final paper. But this one, you simply have to have something that you want to learn more about. And through your research, you'll choose 2 sources about this topic, and you'll critique them. And hopefully along the way, you will learn more and you will develop your own opinions as a result of your research. All right, we're going to move on to the next page now, which talks a little bit more about choosing your topic. Also gives you an overview of using opposing viewpoints in a little bit more detail, but I do think it's pretty straightforward and you won't have any trouble navigating it. All right, so start thinking about your topic.